Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I am Tim O'Malley, joined by Drew Mantak of Irish Illustrated, and Drew was not only down at the NFL Combine, but also attended all of Notre Dame's Pro Day yesterday. So we wanted to have Drew on to kind of put a bow on the pre-draft happenings for Notre Dame's team, Notre Dame's players, and very quickly, Drew, there are 16 Notre Dame players there, including two former players. I always find that interesting. The guys that come back for a Pro Day, they're welcome back with open arms usually.
Yeah, so Cedar Kwanu and man,
Antonio Carter.
Antonio Carter, who I forget because he showed up on campus and then hardly did anything after
Yes,
he
yeah,
arrived
he
one
was.
year. So both of them were there. They worked out. There's also a linebacker from Indiana State who was invited too. So yeah, it's always interesting to see. I mean, Ursita looked physically impressive like he always did. I didn't follow his
Yeah.
career at Charlotte much after he left, but it's always good that Notre Dame lets those guys come back because they're going to get in front of a scout from every team at Notre Dame, whereas I don't think you're getting that at Charlotte or
Yeah.
Jackson State. So
What's interesting about Aquanu is I was about to joke that's all the way back a 2019 recruit, but so is Jack Kaiser, who we're going to talk about today, and Howard Cross as well. We'll talk about them both a little bit. I never thought was going to talk about Osito Aquanu again, but here he was on Irish Illustrated Insider. And remember, at one point, he moved to running back in the
oh
Brian Kelly
yes.
era. That's a little tidbit on Aquanu that you probably will never need again. But I think the big news coming out of yesterday, Xavier Watts ran better than we thought he would. And it's not like, I think you made the best observation on this, Drew. It's not like Xavier Watts is getting drafted because of his raw athleticism. It's because film don't lie. But it's nice that he ran a nice 40 time as well.
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario is, I mean, he's a better prospect either way than somebody like Jalen Elliott, but I think you remember he had a really good like Senior Bowl, went
Yeah.
to the combine and then ran, I want to say like in the 4.7s and then just had no chance of getting drafted. And I don't think there's any reality where Xavier Watts wasn't getting drafted, but if he runs a 4.56, there's no concerns about him being too slow
Yeah.
to make it. And I think if you look at no one else had, no one broke the 4.5 mark. So if you even look at the comparison to some of the other Notre Dame players who we would have thought were faster, like he was kind of right up there with guys like Jaden Harrison and stuff who we'll get to later. But I think on the board, people talked a lot about how Hamilton ran a 4.59 and that was a disaster. I would just want to remind everybody that Kyle Hamilton wanted to be a top five pick, and that dropped him to 14. Xavier Watts, this just like cements like he should be a second rounder at this
Right.
point. Where a lot of analysts have him, and he didn't do anything to hurt himself yesterday, and he only did the 40, the vertical, broad jump, and all of those other numbers were solid as well. Nothing was elite, but now NFL scouts can just be like, the film is great.
Yeah.
He is what we expected.
Yeah, and it's cut his hair too. So that's a big that's probably why he
Yes.
shaved a little bit of time off there. I'm sure that was not asked right away by everybody when Xavier Watts showed up. One guy that we knew would test well, and quite frankly, he tests better than he plays, and he was a valuable player for Notre Dame this year, but he does test better than he plays, is Bo Collins. That broad jump, I had to look twice because I remember Kevin Austin a few years ago had the best broad jump. It was 10 feet. He was the only guy that did 10 feet that year. And I looked and saw Bo Collins almost took another foot when I saw 10-10 on that broad jump. That is something we did expect he would jump well. We have been told for a calendar year that Bo Collins, Riley Leonard, and Jack Kaiser were the best testers at Notre Dame.
Yeah, yeah, I think he was impressive. I mean, he didn't like, yeah, 38-inch vertical, like that's not surprising either. Like
Yeah,
he
no.
led those two categories, had a really solid 4.52 40, like just under 200 pounds and over 6'3". Like he is, I don't know his like overall athletic score, but he performed very well on all those in a way that I could honestly see him get drafted just because he has those potential skills. He can block and he's a willing special teams player. So you look at all that and he's certainly athletic and big enough to make it the NFL, and he just kind of cemented that.
Bo Collins will interview, or had probably already. Actually, he was at the combine, so Bo Collins already interviewed well too because he's fantastic to talk to. So honestly, it's a concentration drops or other drop problem for Bo Collins because coincidentally, we talked to Mike Denbrock today, and he, of course, did not mention Bo Collins, but he mentioned the 2024 football team simply dropped an unacceptable amount of balls, and Collins and Faison were actually at the top of that list. But yeah, I had a feeling Bo was going to jump out of the gym because He always has.
Yes.
I never knew if it was a good thing that the summer testing, the guys that tested best at Notre Dame were from Clemson and Duke, but they went to the national championship game, so I guess it doesn't matter anymore if that's the case.
Yeah.
One guy I actually thought he would test a little better, but he didn't hurt himself at all. It was Jack Kaiser. I think if you asked Jack, he was going to break 4.6, and he did not break 4.6 in the 40, but he tested well, especially in the 20-yard shuttle, right, Drew?
Yes, yeah. I want to say his 20-yard shuttle would have been first among linebackers at the combine. One of those is 20-yard shuttle or three cone. Either way, I think both were like top three, like elite level
Mhm.
quickness. And I think that really just adds to like you really saw him at like the Senior Bowl thrive in like one-on-one drills. He had a pick, I believe, either throughout the week or in the game.
Yeah.
Like I think people saw him as a guy who could do those coverage things. And then you saw, I mean, even a 4.62 is faster than some of the other defensive backs at Notre Dame. And then his elite, kind of short area quickness drills really add to the idea that like he can be on the field on third down potentially at the next level. Couple with I think he mentioned yesterday that he played over 800 career special team snaps at Notre
Wow.
Dame.
Yeah.
But you look at that, like he's a guy who can be on the field, make the calls on like a punt block team or whatever it be. So I think he helped himself. I'm still not sure he gets out of like day three.
Right.
But
Right.
he's a guy who I would be shocked if he didn't get drafted.
Yeah, I would too, especially with where Leofau and Bertrand, how they were viewed coming out of Notre Dame, where Kaiser will be viewed, and he had all eyes on him for that entire playoff run. This is Pete Sampson's line, but I'm going to steal it again. Linebacker, whoever you are, where Jack Kaiser gets drafted to your team, Mr. Backup Linebacker, you're out of a job because Jack Kaiser is going to outwork you and out tough you and outsmart you. That is, Kaiser will be playing football because of his special teams acumen for a long time. I think we knew he'd test well, we knew he'd interview well, and he must have been a dream drawing up plays on the board, having all those years under Al Golden as well when he was at the combine.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, yeah, I mean, you look at Drew Tranquil, I think also a 6-year guy, like I could see him having a similar trajectory as that, where he is good in coverage, but can do a lot of different things. And he kind of sticks around because maybe some of those other little things and then kind of develops into a bigger role.
I always felt it was tough, and we're going to talk more about people not testing at the combine for Notre Dame and for a team like, as you mentioned, Drew, Ohio State because of the championship game. But I always thought it was the toughest for all the players was Mitchell Evans because to say he's rushed back is probably not fair to the strength and conditioning staff and medical staff. He wasn't rushed back. He was 100% healthy to play. But Mitchell Evans, at the end of the national championship game, was 14 months removed from ACL surgery and played 16 college football games in the highest competitive action he could be in. And I mean, he had a lot of snaps out there. Mitchell Evans was the lead tight
Yeah.
end. I always thought if anybody needed to test a little later than when the NFL draft combine was, it was Mitchell Evans, and I think that showed up on it pro day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's the only one who did pretty much all the testing at the combine, and then yesterday he improved at everything by at least a little bit. So his numbers were up across the board at the pro day, and I think honestly, based on the couple interviews we've had with him at the combine and then yesterday too, I think he just wanted to show like I'm healthy and I'm willing to like keep pushing through. Like he's like, I played 16 games, I went to the
Yep.
East West Shrine Bowl. I'm gonna
Yeah.
come to the combine. I'm not gonna like let there be any lingering doubt that I needed to like recover to keep performing. I think that was really important to him, and that's probably why he tested at the combine. But yeah, I think he ran a 4.69 yesterday. He dropped about 5 pounds since the combine.
Mhm.
So maybe that helped him just a little bit, but I think he probably is a guy who would have tested even better had he waited. But overall, I think his numbers are pretty good and he's kind of cemented himself as kind of like a mid-round kind of tight end.
He's a great mid-round pick because just the best of Mitchell Evans that we saw before he got hurt, his ability to fight for the ball, his ability to get open in space. And remember, he's the best player on the field in a game, arguably against the Ohio State Buckeyes in 2023. That's a big deal. I know Duke was good on defense, and he was the best player on the field that day, but it was the same against Ohio State. So that's a player you always kind of root for, Mitchell Evans, because he came out of nowhere to be that good. I don't think anyone expected that from the high school quarterback and Mitchell Palooza and all that. But I was glad Evans had such a good showing, and I bring up I was sarcastic during the NFL Combine because I said, well, nowadays people just want to bypass the difficult testing of the combine in that atmosphere and do it at the friendly confines of their home. But you made a great point. for Notre Dame, Ohio State, and I guess Penn State and Texas guys would apply here too, Drew.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of like you're right, a lot of guys are just kind of skipping the combine and doing stuff later. But I think really now that we have this 12 team playoff and games can run all the way until January 20th, and then the combine starts at the end of February. If you really think about it, like usually guys are getting they maybe their season ends, they might take a few days off, and then they're out in California or Arizona or Florida or somewhere like preparing for the combine. They're working on maybe changing their body a little bit to be better at the 40 and the vertical, and they're just like training on like mastering these drills that they've never spent that much time working on, and they're honing how to do that. And if you're a Notre Dame player, and a lot of them, like guys like Jack Kaiser, Riley Leonard went to the Senior Bowl after, so they're not even getting started training until February, and then you're at a month's disadvantage to everyone else who's been training and doing all those things. So I do think while people would still like to see these guys test at the same environment, at the same time and stuff, I do think guys at Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Texas have more of an excuse and justification for why so many of them skipped working out there, because it's really not a fair comparison, because no one's like just picking up and running the 40. Like it is,
Yeah.
they have it down to a science. People are getting paid a lot of money to prepare them to do that. And I don't blame a guy like Xavier Watts for wanting to make sure he's as prepared as everyone else is to do that.
I guess to finish up on my 2019 theme here, Howard Cross, you mentioned that you heard some comments regarding Howard Cross, and that is a guy that look, he's just a better football player than he is a combine tester. But there was a couple things he did well or he helped himself a little bit with some short space.
Yeah, I think he kind of just with how the season went for him, like he's a guy that some people don't have getting drafted at this point. But I think he had, showed well in the short area quickness in particular. Like his 20-yard shuttle was a 4.63. His three cone drill was a 7.53, which would have ranked fourth and third fastest among defensive tackles. So at least you got to see that like maybe he's not very explosive. His numbers don't really show that. He doesn't have elite size, but you saw how when he's presumably healthier than he was last year and he can really take advantage of that short area quickness, that he does have some, more towards elite traits that were lacking. And then he also addressed, I don't know if you remember seeing this, but he some teams wanted him to work out at fullback. I don't
Yeah.
think that ever actually happened, but he discussed kind of getting that feedback, and just how he was very surprised. And I think it was, can you catch? And he was like, what? What are you talking about? So he had to rush out and find, I think he said quadruple XL gloves and start preparing. He's like, I don't know if I'll look good, but just he has huge hands, obviously. And
Yeah, that's been a big deal since
that
he was
has.
recruited. He has huge hands. That's part of
Yeah.
it.
So I think it was trouble trying to, rush out and find gloves and stuff and deal with that. And yeah, again, I don't think anyone's ever actually had him work out there, but he said he's willing to if that's really what somebody wants him to try.
He needed Gronkowski gloves. There's only two guys with those type of hands. That was literally the Howard Cross calling card coming in was he has violent, huge hands. So maybe he can
Yes.
use them. Maybe he probably never get to flash them. But you mentioned running back, so I'm jumping ahead here real fast. But Max Hurleman worked out, and he worked out at running back, not
Yeah.
fullback. But could you kind of explain the Hurleman journey? And actually, his testing looks pretty good compared to some of the scholarship players that Notre Dame had out there that played very big roles in the national championship game.
Yeah, definitely. So he was, defensive back for Notre Dame last year and kind of doing that, and then obviously ended up being the punt returner. But at Colgate, he was like a running back, and he still thinks that if there's any position he would make it at the next level, it would still be as, I mean, obviously a depth piece at maybe
Yeah.
running back.
Special teams is his
Special
core
team
focus.
is his ultimate objective, and switching to corner back for a year really improved his tackling, is what he thought. So he wanted to show NFL scouts yesterday his route running and stuff like that. He was catching deep balls from Riley Leonard yesterday. But I think the most impressive thing is, yeah, he was 5'10", 200 pounds, and ran a 4.6, 4.40, which is on par with some of the, scholarship defensive backs they had last year too. So I mean, he's not a guy who's going to get drafted, but he might make a training camp or something like that, and maybe he can find a role in special teams. But it was interesting to see him kind of have a very calculated journey and way he wanted to go about this.
We didn't touch on Riley Leonard yet. I think Leonard had, of course, yeah, Leonard always has funny lines to talk to the media about. It's always self-deprecating, but this one's a good one. He said, "I didn't run because people think I'm fast, so I want them to still believe I'm fast." I was really looking forward to watching Riley Leonard run and jump, especially jump. I thought he would just jump out of the gym. I'm sure some of it is if he hasn't trained for it, it's less than it would have been back in the past before his two ankle surgeries. Um, not reason he's going to get drafted though. They know he can run the football. How did you had a little bit of a perspective on his passing because the numbers were good, but there's also some intricacies to it and the what the NFL scouts see that we don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of his deep balls, especially early on, were pretty accurate, but you could see the receivers kind of slowing down a little bit at the end of the route to adjust to the pass. And I think while they look good and they're 40, 50 yards down the field, they're still on air. There's no real defense. And I overheard a scout from I think it was an AFC East team like look to somebody else and be like, he's making them work too much for that. Like they don't in that situation, especially, I don't think they want to see the guy throw slowing up. And Leonard even mentioned afterwards too that like his objective was to overthrow them, if anything. Which,
Hmm.
if you think about it, if you overthrow a ball, it's probably not going to get picked too. So he started doing that towards the end of his workout, I think a little more. But I think early on he was kind of getting a little too under some of those throws, and that is something that might be looked at as kind of a demerit against his performance yesterday. But overall, I think he looked good. He looked better than he did at the combine. I'm sure it helps having receivers he's familiar with and
Right.
having more time to train. I think his footwork looks a little better and stuff like that too. But I don't think he hurt himself by any means. But I think if you look, I think maybe even if you watched it on TV, some of those throws might look better than what they would actually be evaluated as.
Just another in the long list of things that real actual scouts know a little bit more than the media do about
Yeah.
NFL football players and what they need. I would love to have a conversation with an actual current NFL scout that interviewed Riley Leonard, that broke down his tape, maybe that his team was interested in drafting Leonard somewhere late. I'd love to hear the feedback on Leonard the passer because I already know the feedback on Leonard the competitor, the runner, the interviewer, the teammate in the locker room, a leader, but I'd like to hear if they think he can improve as a passer. The way a lot of us thought he would when he came from Duke to Notre Dame. I just thought I watched every Duke throw. I thought he was more accurate
Yeah.
than he showed up at Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I guess missing the spring probably really set him back with
Fair.
some of the things. And maybe, I don't know, maybe they just got spooked by some things and how they called the offense after Northern Illinois too. So that maybe changed how they wanted him to develop as a passer at Notre Dame.
Yeah, actually on topic, we talked to Denbrock and he mentioned today, we talked to Mike Denbrock today, and he did mention the struggles in the passing game last year, but he wasn't putting it on the quarterback. He was putting it on the receivers,
Yeah.
not only the drops, but also the depth of the routes, the feel for the routes. He just said we were not an efficient passing team last year. In the NFL, wide receivers probably run a little bit better routes than the new guys that came into Notre Dame
Yeah.
last year. Remember, it was a bit of an overhaul of the wide receiver room. Of course, they lost somebody to the portal. They brought in the portal, and that leads us to two guys I thought were going to run better. Jaden Harrison and Chris Mitchell. I thought testing they would be speed burners. And we know Jaden Harrison can run because he ran away from the SEC, one of the most famous plays in Notre Dame history. But I thought they would test better yesterday, Drew.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking both would be in the 4.4s. I even with Jaden Harrison, I mean my perception was like maybe this is like a high 4.3 guy. Like
Yeah,
I mean, I walked into that thinking he would definitely be the best tester, and Harrison ended up with a 4.57, which is slightly slower than Xavier Watts, even, which I would have never guessed. And
no,
given his size and production and things like that, I think that's a pretty bad sign from him. And maybe in hindsight, kind of Chris Mitchell ran the fastest 40 time, I should say, as well at the 4.5, but again, wasn't in that four
right.
range, wasn't a burner. And maybe that should have is kind of a sign for what we expected out of them last year and then didn't ultimately see too as these guys who were going to stretch the field at Notre Dame. I guess maybe we have a better understanding as to why.
A couple other guys that I don't think we saw them as draft picks, of course, but they were invaluable for Notre Dame. And one was a top 12 without argument, really, if we're trying not to split hairs at all, player on the football team in Jordan Clark last year. I did not think he'd test great. I just think he's a really good football player, but it would have been nice if he could have flashed some numbers out there that would kind of draw a look. I think he was a undrafted free agent anyway, and I think his ability is going to allow him to stay on a team.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I mean, I guess you were hoping he really surprised us with the 40 or
Yeah.
something else, and maybe that gets him drafted when he wouldn't have. But he ended up running a 4.64. Um, Definitely just undersized nickel cornerback, not really gonna jump out to anyone. So I think he had disappointed. I think I wrote that his best event he put up 18 reps on the bench press, which is pretty good for a 5'9" guy for sure. Who's only 180 pounds or so. But that's not a great sign when your best workout was your bench press and you're a shifty defensive back. So
Rod Hurd, of course, I saw his interview and I thought this was great. Because Jack Kaiser talked about it, how Notre Dame prepared him for the NFL and NFL defenses. And of course, Al Golden is part of the reason for that. But Rod Hurd was only there 1 year, and we saw him used as a safety, as a nickel, as a dime in different situations. And it was enlightening for him to say, "Yeah, I made the right choice to come to Notre Dame and end up being a backup." First of all, he got 4 games of tape that it wasn't going to happen at Northwestern in the
yeah.
postseason when he came to Notre Dame. And in the highest leverage situations, I mean, he went against the best tight end of the country in the semifinals and the best passing game of the country in the championship game. Did you see that interview? Were you up for that interview with Hurd, or I'm sure you've read what he said about it?
Yeah, I was up there. I mean, yeah, I think there were some people asking him, all the transfers about their Notre Dame experience, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
he was the one I would thought maybe wouldn't look at it as favorably. Like you said, like he lost his job to a
yeah.
sophomore. We all thought he would be the starting safety. He didn't have that. A lot of other guys, but he just ended up being a Swiss Army knife, which I'm sure his perspective is like I'm willing to play whatever role you need me. Like he's not going to go into whatever team he might end up on a training camp for or whatnot as a guy with an ego. Like he understands like, hey, if I need to fill this other role that I wasn't expecting, like you've seen my willingness to do it. So I think it's interesting that he views that as a positive ultimately. And you're right, he still had a lot of good reps against a lot of really good teams last year.
And then a guy like Devin Ford, obviously, he is there for. He's going to be special teams is his future duty in the NFL, and I think at some point Devin Ford will stick as a special teamer in the NFL just because he's so versatile in that role.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another guy didn't do any testing that was amazing, but I think
Right,
he's another
right.
guy who switched to defense for a little bit at times last year to just kind of work on tackling. And he honestly, his like praise for Notre Dame and just like the willingness to like put your team first and stuff like that. He kind of spoke glowingly of that and the impact coming to Notre Dame was, and he was very like emphatic. I have no regrets about picking this place.
Well, he got to beat his former team too in the semifinals, so I'm sure that felt pretty good for Devin Ford. I want to wrap up with a guy that we would be talking, probably highlighting this with, had he not injured his knee against Indiana, Riley Mills, and it's something from the NFL Combine that I find fascinating that you brought up, Drew.
Yeah, I think he went into it, he got hurt in late December and obviously was like, I'm still going to prepare for the combine, but I can't test, which I mean, he's a guy who was on the freaks list, what, 2 or 3 times? So
Yeah,
Bruce Feldman's freaks list. So that would have been something he tested well. And he kind of just, once he got hurt, switched his mindset to like, I think his quote was like, the interviews will be my Super Bowl. And that's what he put all his effort in. And he asked Jack Kaiser to teach him about coverages and so he could know well beyond what's going to be required of a defensive tackle to kind of show that he was using that time efficiently and that enabled him to go up and draw some like plays and formations up on the board and stuff for interviews and really took advantage of that. And certainly I think he just started walking like a week before the NFL Combine. So now he's at least moving around. Yesterday he said he's trying to like walk like 6 miles a day right now because he can't run yet. But he's like, I think he
wow.
called it Forrest Gumping it was his term, which is pretty good. So and now he's just hoping that teams kind of look at his medicals and see the numbers that were publicized over the last few years on what he can do athletically. Because he's a guy who, I mean, you would have liked to see, even just seeing what he did with the bench press and stuff like that,
Yeah.
would have been really interesting.
Always enjoyed talking to Riley Mills, if not transcribing Riley Mills, one of the faster talkers on the football team. And Mills was always enjoyable, and you really felt for him when that injury happened. I just kind of want to finish up. This is related to the combine, but it was from interviews today. I asked Eli Raridan when he felt healthy, and I meant not your knee. When did you feel healthy after a 16 game season when you spent so much time rehabbing before? He mentioned needing 3 weeks off. As you pointed out, these guys didn't. The players, these Notre Dame players, got 3 weeks off. these guys at the pro day and combine didn't have the luxury of taking 3 weeks off, and I think that's it. Kind of encapsulates the challenge of no one doesn't want to go to the national championship game, but even the coaches joke like, well, it's not mid-season. We played all year long. Your goal is to play all year long, of course, but it
Yes.
is a big change for those four, maybe it's basically those four teams that go so deep into January now, especially for the veterans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, honestly, I think that makes it a little more curious why Morrison didn't work out
Yeah.
yesterday too. Because he's had a lot of time. He said he was healthy at the combine. Somebody asked him about his health yesterday. He said, I'm healthy. Um, I guess I understand why he might want a little more time to train, but he doesn't even have a date set for his showcase that he's going to have. So, and the draft is less than a month away. So that's kind of to your point, like kind of makes him a little more curiosity. It makes me, I, he's really just going to have to prove that he's healthy at this
Yeah.
pro day because I'm sure the longer this goes, the more doubts that are creeping into scouts and general managers' minds.
When you have Ben Morrison's film, you're the one guy on the team probably that can say, I'd like to have my own private showcase, and you guys can all come watch me because people will want to see that. That is a, that's a defensive changing player if he is totally healthy. Drew Bentock, great coverage of the NFL Combine and Notre Dame's Pro Day. Thank you very much for being on with me today, and we will be at interviews tomorrow. It is defensive early enrollees, which includes mid-year guys. So we'll talk to Devontae Smith and Dawson and hopefully Stroman, some of the other guys, and of course the freshman Notre Dame defensive players will be scattered about. I have been told I think we're going to be scattered about. No more upstairs situations. So we'll get some interesting stories from those guys tomorrow. Until then, we also have a podcast coming up on Monday, our Irish Illustrated Insider. Until then, thank you very much for listening. For Drew Mentalk, I'm Tim O'Malley. This has been a special edition of Irish Illustrated Insider, Notre Dame's Pro Day.